Hey, everybody. It is Tuesday, June 24th. You're listening to the Mo News Podcast. I'm Moshe Nunu.
And I am Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. Jill, how's the staying cool situation going in your household?
It's going. I think the key is to just stay inside best as you can.
Yeah, if you can stay inside, do it. Dude, it was miserable. Thankfully, the subway car I took had air conditioning. The subway stations that I was waiting in, not so much with the air conditioning. So it was a little rough. We got a big day today. This is the sort of peak of the heat today, at least for this heat dome. Jill, it's hard in the asphalt jungle that is New York City. And by the way, that's true of most cities. Typically, it is 5, sometimes 10 degrees warmer in areas where you don't have much park or much greenery and you're just there on the asphalt. Actually, I'm here to tell you where you're at. It's much cooler than where I'm at, Jill. Much more open spaces there in the burbs.
Well, Moshe, you're welcome to come to the Mo News Long Island Bureau anytime you want.
Yes, I may take you up on that sometime soon, depending on how the heat waves go this summer. But it's not just New York; it's Chicago, Cleveland, Louisville, Nashville, Raleigh. All of you are going to feel 100-degree plus temps today, plus humidity. So the heat index is going to be rough. Get your water, stay cool, and don't underestimate the importance of hydration right now.
All right, let's get to the headlines here. Ceasefire in the Middle East. President Trump announced that Israel and Iran would stop fighting, effective overnight. It came after Iran's much anticipated retaliation.
Yeah, it was a whirlwind Monday afternoon. We'll break down what happened and why Iran's retaliation with missiles actually brought us closer to a ceasefire.
Back here in the U.S., the Supreme Court rules in favor of the Trump administration when it comes to deportations. We'll explain. Texas becomes the first state in the U.S. to require warning labels on food packaging, and the largest state in the country to require public schools to post the 10 Commandments in classrooms. So we'll take a look at the state's move to embrace the culture of Maha and the religious right.
A lot going on down there in Texas.
Voters heading to the polls today in New York City. Why you should care, even if you don't live in the Big Apple.
And how the heat here in New York might affect the mayoral race.
Another rapper from the early 2000s is facing a sexual misconduct lawsuit. How the details in this suit mirror the explosive testimony in the Sean Diddy Combs sex trafficking trial, which is set to go to the jury this week.
Yeah, we will tell you about the decision made on whether Diddy will be testifying or not.
And did you happen to catch Kristin Chenoweth singing the Star Spangled Banner at the NBA Finals? Ouch.
That was something, Joe. The social media people on the socials, they have opinions about that performance.
Yeah, we'll talk about why performing the national anthem can be quite a lightning rod for celebrities.
Go back to like the Fergie national anthem, the Roseanne Barr national anthem from the 90s. There have been a lot.
Yes, we'll take a walk down memory lane. And Moshe is on this day in history.
Big day for Fergie, Will.I.am. And how do we pronounce it? Apple to App?
And the other guy?
And the other guy. Black Eyed Peas history. Remember them from the early 2000s. They were blowing it up. They got it started today.
Speaking of Fergie, by the way.
Yeah. But look at that. 2 Fergie mentions in the first 3 minutes, folks.
The first 2 and only mentions on the Mo News Podcast in its, 3-year history?
Fergie, her time has come.
All right, let's start with major news in the Middle East. A ceasefire between Iran and Israel to be phased in over a 24-hour period, which started overnight Eastern time. President Trump broke the news via a post on his social media platform, Truth Social, laying out the very specific timeline that both Israel and Iran, quote, wound down and completed their in-progress final missions. Moshe, as this news cycle moves at a crazy pace, we were in the middle of recording the podcast for today, in which the lead story was Iran's retaliatory strikes on the U.S.'s biggest military base in the Middle East. When Trump hit send on that post, reading from it again, he says, quote, on the assumption that everything works as it should, which it will, I would like to congratulate both countries, Israel and Iran, on having the stamina, courage, and intelligence to end what should be called the 12-day war. Moshe, I guess that is a nod to the 6-day war back in 1967.
Trump is big on branding, so he is branding this the 12-day war. And frankly, the announcement, Jill, delivered in a way that only Donald Trump can. Jill, I will say it was interesting coming from Trump here. He didn't allow the two sides to back out, even negotiate internally. He made the announcement. And for a while there, last night, it was not clear whether this was actually going to go down. And I should say late into the night, as of just after midnight Eastern time, Iran actually sent 7 different barrages of missiles before and then slightly after the ceasefire deadline. As of this taping, 3 Israelis are dead, a number are injured. A number of those missiles got through in the southern city of Beersheba in Israel. And so the big question as we wake up this morning is the ceasefire a reality? Will Israel have responded due to the fact that I guess Iran couldn't agree to the ceasefire and actually go forth with it unless it got like its last few rounds of missiles off? So again, 7 rounds as of this count, just after midnight Eastern time. And the question as to whether this will remain a reality here. A reminder, this is the Middle East where ceasefires do come and go.
So one of the big questions that we had over the course of the quote unquote 12-day war was Israel going to target the supreme leader of Iran? So was there going to be regime change, or would Israel try to force some type of regime change? And the answer here seems to be no, at least not yet.
No, ultimately, the goal here for the Israelis and the Americans was the end of the Iranian nuclear program. And they have achieved that over the course of the past 12 days. At least, if not ended it, they have pushed it back several years, upwards of 5. There's estimates of 10, depending on how much uranium was destroyed along with those various nuclear facilities. And this spoke to what we talked about on the podcast yesterday. Netanyahu and Trump both using this expression, peace through strength, and the belief here that by weakening Iran to this point, Iran was effectively crying uncle here and needed a way out. And so what you saw here was the achievement by the Israelis and Americans of mission number 1. And then, to your point, the question was, will they go for regime change? And the belief was that assassinating the supreme leader and trying to eliminate the Iranian government was not something that they had in the cards, that they knew would end well. There was a concern, especially from Donald Trump, that whatever leader would come out of taking out the current regime could be worse. And, the U.S. does have a track record of forced regime change not ending the way they wanted it in Iraq and several other places.
One analyst said it's the Ayatollah you know versus the Ayatollah you don't know.
Definitely. And as far as they're concerned, it is up to the Iranian people to pursue regime change. But what this war has revealed to the Iranian people, and frankly, everyone else in the world, is just how weak this Iranian regime is, how weak their military is, how weak their security establishment is. They were easily infiltrated by the Israelis to the point the Israelis were able to take out every major nuclear scientist and a number of key generals, the head of the military several times over the last 12 days, and then their replacements, and then again. And so ultimately here, their hope is that Iran, no stranger to multiple revolutions, multiple protests in recent years that have been put down by this regime, that the Iranian people have seen sort of the state of this regime. And this regime, hoping to continue to stay in power here, saw no point in continuing this war. The Israelis saw that they had checked the boxes on damaging the Iranian missile program, Iranian nuclear program. And so there you have it, that surprise announcement on Monday afternoon.
And this all came just hours after Iran launched its much anticipated retaliatory attack on the largest U.S. military installation in the Middle East. We're talking about Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar. The Defense Department said that Iran fired a combination of 14 medium-range and ballistic missiles. They were all intercepted. There were no reports of U.S. casualties and no damage to the American base. Residents in Doha, which is the capital of Qatar, reported hearing a series of loud booms. Videos captured lights streaking upward, which is apparently part of a missile defense system. And some objects could be seen in the videos falling to earth.
Jill, we were actually we got an early heads up from Mo News Committee members who happened to be in Qatar. They sent us some video. We posted it over on the Instagram channel. Thankfully, they're all safe. As you mentioned, those missiles were intercepted. But the target here is significant. The Al Udeid Air Base, it is the forward headquarters for CENTCOM, U.S. Central Command in the Middle East. It's actually where President Trump recently gave a speech during his visit to Qatar earlier this spring. and was considered a potential target for Iran, but located in Qatar. Qatar and Iran have a good relationship. They actually share the largest natural gas field in the world. And so the fact that they went after that was significant. Iran on their state media saying, this is not us going after Qatar. This is going after that base that they host there. That, in fact, the Qataris, for the most part, paid for the construction of that base, the maintenance of that base. It has about 10,000 U.S. military and civilian personnel. But as of last week, the U.S. basically cleared it out. All the planes flew out of there, anticipating that at some point the Iranians might go after it. One of the significant things here, Iran gave Qatar and the U.S. a heads up. And that might be surprising to some of you, but this was very carefully choreographed. The Iranians needed to save face, if you will, retaliate for the attacks over the weekend, those 3 nuclear sites the U.S. hit, but didn't want to risk basically leading to a larger war here. They didn't want to risk a larger American response. We told you on the podcast yesterday, Trump was very serious that if you attack us in a significant way, we will hit you even harder. And they took that threat very seriously. So they gave the Qataris a heads up. About an hour before the missiles launched, Qatari shut down its airspace. They had about 100 planes headed to Doha. Remember, Doha International is a significant airport. So they had to reroute all that commercial air travel to area airports down in the UAE, Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Bahrain, Riyadh, a variety of places. And then the missiles came. And the U.S. interceptors got all of them. And that was effectively the choreography here. And that was the hope. Now, it is a very risky bet to launch missiles hoping they won't hit. So then you can argue that you launched the missiles, Iran, and you looked really strong, but then you didn't kill anybody. Thankfully, though, according to President Trump, the U.S. intercepted 13 of 14 of those missiles, but one of the missiles was actually just headed to no man's land and wasn't going to risk anything, so they didn't intercept it. So that ultimately is the story of the Iranian response here. And again, for Iran, they were in this tough spot where they want to look strong to their people that they were responding, but they don't want to cause a fight with the 500-pound gorilla in the U.S. and knew that doing something significant, which is what we told you yesterday, like a terror attack inside the U.S., killing civilians, killing anyone, frankly, was going to risk the wrath of Trump and potentially for the supreme leader and his regime, which are on the ropes right now. They've been crushed by the Israelis, by the Americans here. They don't want to risk the entire regime over this response. They did something small. This is very similar to what we told you about happened 5 years ago in the aftermath of the U.S. assassination of the top Iranian general Soleimani. They basically did this thing 5 years ago where they gave the U.S. a heads up. Hey, we're totally going to send some missiles at your base. Clear it out. And that's what they did. And then they got to say, hey, we totally got them. In fact, Jill, the press release or the statement by the Iranian government used the word obliterated the U.S. base in Doha. For the record, no missiles fell on the base in Doha, but for the purposes of Iranian propaganda, they claimed that so they could, again, look strong here. Symbolism was important, by the way. The Iranians made a point of launching 14 missiles. Why is that number significant? Well, because the U.S. dropped 14 bunker busters on Iran over the weekend. So they said, you dropped 14 bunker busters, we launched 14 missiles. We should note for the record, the U.S. actually used 75 ordnance bombs, rockets, over the weekend. They launched a bunch of tomahawks as well, but the Iranians, again, made the point of 14 for 14.
So, Moshe, the big takeaway would be that this was the much anticipated off-ramp that a lot of people were hoping for.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? It's very weird while a missile attack is happening and just right after to be like, okay, I feel good now. Like, things are done. But that's effectively, the view on things, which is we knew Iran had to do something. We were hoping it was going to be, something small. There was talk over the weekend that they may, we're going to close the Strait of Hormuz to a third of all global oil traffic. That idea was clearly shut down. I imagine the Chinese called on line 1 to Tehran being like, you will not be doing that to our oil and our prices and the global market. Try again with a response. And so I guess take 2 was, okay, we'll lob 14 missiles. We hope the U.S. shoots them down, and then we'll end this whole thing and put out a press release that we totally showed them this time. And what was interesting, Jill, is that you saw that in the markets play out. If you had CNBC or Bloomberg TV on as the afternoon was unfolding on Monday, stocks were going up and oil prices were coming down during the attack because everyone was like, phew. This is the thing we were looking for. And it's, again, totally bizarre to probably be saying that while literally missiles are being launched at a U.S. military base. But it's like, oh, they're not going to do the oil thing. Cool. Oil's getting cheaper. Stocks are going up. Like chapter 2 of the Iran conflict, we'll call Israel-Iran. Chapter 1, we'll call U.S. versus Iran. Chapter 2. Chapter 2 is done after basically 48 hours.
The looming question now, Israel's war with Hamas in Gaza. Hamas is one of Iran's proxies, like Hezbollah in Lebanon and the Houthis in Yemen. So many Israeli analysts will say that Iran is basically the head of the octopus. So does weakening the head of the octopus somehow weaken the rest of the proxies? And will this help facilitate some type of ceasefire with Hamas in Gaza? We'll see.
Yeah, that's certainly the hope here. Keep in mind that if you look at the past 19 or so months, starting with October 7th, that ultimately that was an attack that was helped funded and armed by Iran. In fact, Iran actually had a whole goal here. Iran was sort of at peak strength going into October 7th. They, one of the stated goals of the Iranian regime, in fact, they have a countdown clock, a doomsday clock in a main square on a billboard in Tehran that ticks down the number of days they believe Israel will exist before Iran can destroy it. In fact, that was actually a target drill yesterday of the Israelis trying to bomb that billboard in Tehran. So for Iran, a key mission of the Islamic regime is the end of Israel. And so they were hoping between arming Hezbollah, Hamas, various other assets, that they would be able to go for that. Hamas pulled the trigger early on October 7th. And in fact, I mentioned this yesterday. It's sort of seen as, we could look at it as like Hamas, Iranian Pearl Harbor, as in they sort of had a peak day there with that attack. And it's been all downhill for them after that, because sort of comparing Iran to the Imperial Japan in this comparison. And so ultimately, over the course of the past, 20 months, year and a half here, you have basically pretty significant destruction to Hamas. They still exist in some form, but they can't do anything remotely what they did on October 7th anymore. You had effectively decapitation of Hezbollah and all their major leadership. Damaged by the Israelis here that didn't even participate in these last 12 days of war, even though they are a key asset of the Iranians. And now you have the Iranians. They were not able to defend their own country. The Israelis and Americans basically flying all over their country, bombing whatever targets they would like over the last 12 days, totally infiltrated by the Mossad, the Israeli intelligence, to the point where the Mossad was able to get all the phone numbers and convince all the top generals in Iran to meet in one bunker together, that then enabled the Israelis to blow up that bunker and kill a bunch of key Iranian personnel. So total embarrassment here for the Iranians. And so the idea here, when it comes to Gaza, which you just brought up, which is, well, there's no one really in Hamas's corner anymore. The Qataris are fed up with them. The Iranians aren't able to support them anymore. Now there is Hezbollah. By the way, remember those Houthis in Yemen? They get all their missiles from Iran. Well, Iran's missile stockpile is significantly down after this war. And so they're not going to be interested or capable of really helping them out right now. So ultimately, Hamas at a weak point here. And so the hope, I'm certain, from the White House and from the folks on the Israeli side, is they'll cut a deal here for the hostages and end that war in the near term here after this huge victory in Iran. So we'll see what unfolds there. But then, of course, when it comes to Gaza, who runs it afterwards? The key sticking point here is Hamas wants to continue to run it. The Israelis want anyone but Hamas to be the government of Gaza moving forward. And so, it's not clear how long it'll take here, but it's probably closer to the end than it was yesterday before the ceasefire. And that's the impression here that you get from Trump and Netanyahu, is their feeling is they were leaving here from a very significant position of strength. And so ultimately, Trump's dream right now is to wrap all of this up, because he's got a lot of economic ambitions. That was the nature of his trip to the Middle East recently, to the Saudis, to the Qataris. And so ultimately, as far as he's concerned, he wants that war to be over so everyone can move on here. And, the hope is for some grand bargain, grand deal, similar to what we saw in the first term with what was called the Abraham Accords. Those were the accords that opened up relations between Israel and a number of Arab countries, Bahrain, the UAE, the Moroccans. And in this case, they're looking for an expansion, sort of a grand deal here. And the sort of cherry on top would be the Saudis and the Israelis strike some sort of major deal here, basically the home of Islam, the Jewish state, striking a deal here that would also lead to some sort of bettering situation, some sort of state for the Palestinians, some sort of entity that the Israelis would be okay with security-wise, and that the Palestinians would be okay with autonomy-wise. So a lot moving here. They say sometimes, Jill, there are decades where nothing happens, and then there are days or weeks where decades happen. And that certainly seems to be the case here.
Usually it's when you go on vacation.
Well, I'm glad to be back for this part. This is going to be something to watch. Jill, before we head to the speed read here, I just want to mention that tonight I'll be doing a workshop on all things Iran. I'll be talking about this deal, certainly, but we'll be doing a whole history of Iran, how we got here, U.S.-Iran relations, how the CIA pulled a coup off in Iran back in the 50s. It sort of brought us to the situation today. There's a long history of that with U.S. foreign policy, the rise of the Ayatollah, and the whole nuclear background and everything that you've been unfolding here. I'll seek to provide clarity. That's for Mo News Premium members. I know there's a number of new members in the past week or two, so appreciate all of you joining to support us over there. The workshops are something we do on the regular. If you can't make it for the live Zoom tonight, we do provide it for premium members on the website as well as on the premium podcast. If you're not a premium member, what are you waiting for? Come join immediately. We do a 2-week free trial over at mo.news/premium. That is mo.news/premium. To get access to all that extra analysis and information, our members-only Instagram page, as well as knowing you're supporting independent media, supporting Jill, me, the whole team here at Mo News, as we seek to provide you clarity and calm in a sea of madness.
And what madness would you be referring to, Moshe? I haven't seen any
Jill,
of that.
The media, all the people trying to provoke and scare the hell out of you, and we're trying to do the opposite. So appreciate all of you.
All right, time for the speed read from CBS News. The Supreme Court on Monday lifted a lower court order that prevented the Trump administration from deporting migrants to countries that are not their places of origin without first giving them the chance to raise fears of torture, persecution, or death. The order from a high court is a victory for the Trump administration, which has faced recent setbacks from the justices in its efforts to swiftly deport migrants as part of its crackdown on immigration. In a brief, unsigned order that did not explain its reasoning, the court put on hold a federal judge's ruling that said those affected nationwide should have a, quote, meaningful opportunity to bring claims that they would be at risk of torture, persecution, or death if they were sent to countries the administration has made deals with to receive deported immigrants. As a result, the administration will be able to try to quickly remove immigrants to countries including South Sudan. Affected migrants can still attempt to bring individual claims. The 3 liberal justices, Sonia Sotomayor, Elena Kagan, and Ketanji Brown Jackson, dissented from the court's decision regarding third country removals.
Yeah, so the order came in the court fight over the Trump administration effort to swiftly deport migrants to third countries. When we say third countries, we mean the countries other than their country of origin if they refuse to take them. So as part of the agenda here from the White House and his plan for more deportations, he's approached, you mentioned South Sudan, also countries like Costa Rica, Panama, Rwanda, about accepting migrants from countries that are not their own, but their own countries won't take them either. And of course, they have that arrangement with El Salvador. That's El Salvador, which has that huge prison, that 40,000 person prison that's offered to basically take whoever we send. We pay them a certain amount of money to take whatever migrants, and then they put them in prison. Now, we should mention that all of those potentially affected by litigation here in this particular Supreme Court decision are already subject to deportation, as in they've gone through immigration courts, a judge has determined that they should be deported, but their home countries, again, countries of origin, will not take them. So this case dealt with, well, but look, we don't want to go to these third-party countries and we should have more rights to deal with it. And so ultimately, in this ruling, it appears the Supreme Court is allowing Trump to still deport them to third countries. It appears to be 6-3. You didn't get explanation again. It was an unsigned ruling by the Supreme Court. So don't really have conservative rationale here, but we do hear from the 3 liberals who are very concerned about it. And, you know, the core of this really speaks to what extent can these people make their argument and make their case about that third party country, in particular, if they have a certain, identity that might cause an issue there. One of the, examples that was brought up here is that one of the individuals happened to be gay, who's being deported to a country that is not friendly to LGBT folks. And so that was the nature of that. So, we'll continue to watch this. But, there's all these cases going on when it comes to the deportation agenda. And it appears that White House at least got a win yesterday. It still appears here that these folks are getting a due process. But again, they feel that there should be an extra process here related to, being sent to a third party country. And so this lifts the lower court judge's freeze on this, but you can imagine this might make its way back up to the Supreme Court in the next year.
From the Washington Post, Texas Governor Greg Abbott signed legislation Sunday that would require labels on foods that contain dyes and additives that are commonly found in the U.S. food supply. The first of its kind bill will require these labels on foods that contain 44 dyes or additives, including candy, baked goods, and drinks. The United States currently does not have warning labels on its food products, unlike some other countries. At the end of the Biden administration, the FDA released a proposal to require new labels on the front of packages to flag when a food or a drink contains high, medium, or low levels of sodium, saturated fat, and added sugars. But some nutrition experts and lawmakers have called for the FDA to opt for stronger warning levels, like the stop sign-shaped warnings that are used in Chile, Peru, and Mexico. The Texas legislation uses a different approach. The bill focuses on ingredients like bleached flour, red dye 40, and yellow 5. It requires companies to add high contrast labels in a, quote, prominent and reasonably visible spot that say, quote, warning, this product contains an ingredient that is not recommended for human consumption by the appropriate authority in Australia, Canada, the European Union, or the United Kingdom. Governor Abbott signing that legislation despite strong pushback from the food industry, which argued that warning labels would be misleading and create a patchwork system that would put Texas-based companies at a disadvantage.
So this is going to be interesting because it'll be a scramble here in the food industry on what to do. Are they going to, they don't want warning labels on their products. That's not good for business. But ultimately, does this mean they have to create multiple labels here to deal with the 49 other states and Texas? Or do they just print the warning label one? That's always the challenge here when a state makes a rule and it's not a federal rule, which is always annoying to companies that sell their products in all 50 states. The other, of course, thing they could do is just change the ingredients in their products to avoid warning labels, which is sort of the goal here. And you have seen that recently from some of the stuff that's been coming out of Washington with RFK Jr., a number of companies that have announced that they are removing things like red dye, this number and that number. It is interesting to see this move here. There are, health advocates that have been pushing for this, and they feel that the wind is at their backs here. You have seen other recent state laws regarding chemicals in food back in 2023. That's when California passed a law prohibiting food from containing red dye number 3. Of course, now that's been followed on by the federal government. West Virginia's governor also signed legislation that bans food with 7 dyes from being served in school lunch programs. And you have seen Kraft Heinz, Tyson, other companies say they will abide by that.
Governor Abbott also signed a bill that will require all public school classrooms in Texas to display the 10 Commandments under a new law, making Texas the biggest state in the country to try to impose such a mandate. The law goes into effect for the upcoming 2025-2026 school year. Texas has nearly 6 million students in more than 9,000 public schools. Supporters say the 10 Commandments are part of the foundation of the United States judicial and educational systems and should be displayed. Opponents say the 10 Commandments infringe on others' religious freedom and are a violation of the constitutional principle of the separation of church and state.
So not surprisingly, we expect this to get a legal challenge, especially, the separation between church and state here is a thing that has been adjudicated a number of times. A number of folks point to a 1980 Supreme Court ruling regarding a Kentucky 10 Commandments case, and that struck that down, saying that posting them was against the law. It lacked a secular purpose. So a lot of skeptics here say this likely will not stand. Abbott does have a history, though, of arguing before the Supreme Court regarding the 10 Commandments. He was Texas State Attorney General back in 2005 when the Supreme Court actually ruled that Texas could keep 10 Commandments monument on the grounds of the Capitol. Now, this is a very different classroom situation. The court tends to take that much more seriously. Be curious whether it's dismissed and how this gets ruled on. But based on that Supreme Court precedent from 1980, you can imagine some lower courts might strike this down, saying it has a separation of church and state issue there. And we've been following this issue in a number of states, in particular in Oklahoma, where they ordered public schools, grades 5 through 12, to incorporate the Bible into lesson plans. That's facing a number of legal issues as well. Louisiana's recent law, by the way, has also been ruled unconstitutional recently. They had a similar law related to the 10 Commandments in the classroom. So an uphill climb here if Texas thinks this is going to stand.
From the New York Times, voters are headed to the polls today in New York City to determine who will run the biggest city in the country. In a new poll out yesterday, 33-year-old Progressive Assembly member Zohran Mamdani, a proud socialist, continues to gain ground on former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo. The poll found 35% of likely Democratic primary voters are supporting Cuomo. 32% are supporting Mamdani. Cuomo is relying on labor unions and paid canvassers to get out the vote. Mamdani claiming to have 46,000 unpaid volunteers who he says have knocked on 1.3 million doors across the city's 5 boroughs so far. Polls show Cuomo leading among Black voters, women, and older New Yorkers, the groups that are historically most likely to vote in a primary. But the heat wave gripping New York this week could dampen voter turnout. The candidates encouraged their supporters to vote early last week as the heat forecast for this week became clear, and promised their supporters that there would be water offered at the polling sites. Cuomo even demanded that air conditioning be installed at polling sites around the city. The turnout battle comes after months of increasingly personal squabbles among the 11 Democrats on the ballot over issues like policing, housing policy, and who is best equipped to confront President Trump. The current New York City Mayor, Eric Adams, who remains a registered Democrat, is going to skip the primary, and he'll be running as an independent in November.
Yeah, that's something we should note here is that the Democratic primary is today, and it typically determines based on New York City's politics and history who the next mayor is going to be. But this is a case where, regardless of who wins tonight, Jill, we're resetting for November, because if Cuomo is able to pull it out, Mamdani probably runs on the socialist ticket. You also have Eric Adams. There's also there is a Republican Party in New York City, and they sometimes get between 20 and 30%. So you'll have a Republican, you'll have Eric Adams, and then you'll likely see a repeat here between Cuomo and Mamdani. Question is whether Cuomo decides to run as an independent here, given lots of questions around Eric Adams and how they would split the vote 4 ways. But for now, we have the primary today, and it really is coming down here, though there are multiple candidates down to Cuomo and Mamdani. Cuomo, many of you have heard about before. He had to resign as governor several years ago due to sexual harassment allegations, though eventually some of those were heard in court and dismissed by judges, which has been part of his argument that ultimately they had no weight to them. So he's back again, and he has the experience as governor, as somebody who served in the cabinet under President Clinton, the long history of the Cuomos in New York. His father was governor. And so ultimately, Andrew Cuomo is back. He knows how to get things done. And that's been part of his argument here, is that he was going to make New York City business friendly again. He is a moderate as opposed to somebody who answers to the left. And that's been the case that he's making. But there's not much groundswell of support for him in terms of kind of grassroots excitement. People are not excited to vote for Andrew Cuomo. They're sort of like, oh, well, he's back and I have my issues with him. But ultimately, I like him better than Mamdani. What's the rap on Mamdani? Well, he's seen this huge surge of support. Jill, he's young. He'd be the youngest mayor in New York City in 100 years. And he's promising the world, like literally a lot, to the point where Cuomo's like, you will bankrupt the city. We cannot pay for all this stuff. He wants to freeze rent for rent-regulated units. He wants to offer a whole bunch of incentives in the city. He wants to raise taxes on businesses, raise taxes on the wealthy, because he wants to pay for free buses and childcare. Now, ultimately, the knock on New York in recent years is that it's become so, the taxes have gotten so high that the tax base of the city, wealthy people, are leaving the city in droves and is leading to issues. And so that's the core of the conflict here, which is, what is the future of the biggest city in America? We will see. One of the unique features, by the way, of this election, New York has ranked choice ballot voting. So you're going to see rounds. You're going to see an initial round and then a second round and a third round. And the way it works is you rank your candidates. So you might say, 1 Cuomo, 2, for somebody else, 3 Mamdani, whatever. And you go through these rounds until somebody gains a majority here. And so when you look at the polling, based on the alliances, even if you see right now, it looks like the slight advantage Cuomo in the first round, but that as the rounds go and the candidates start to fall out, that Mamdani will pull it out based on his alliance. So you see a lot of calls in New York, don't rank this person, don't rank that person. And so we will see the results here. New York City is slow counting. So I don't know if we'll see something tonight, but we shall see.
It is interesting. I have seen more don't vote for this person than vote for this person.
Don't rank them. Rank everybody else but them so they don't show up in a later round. And just statistically, I mentioned the biggest city. I asked one of our interns today to pull up the numbers here, Jill. New York City, about 9 million people. That is more than 38 states. So if New York City was a state, effectively the mayor would be the governor of the 10th or 11th largest state in the country. So, not insignificant.
Also, the city's last three former mayors, Rudy Giuliani, Michael Bloomberg, and Bill de Blasio, all ran for president. So the outcome here could potentially influence the Democratic field of candidates for 2028.
Yeah. Yes. We will give New York City will give another losing candidate to the presidential race in 4 years or 8 years, because we never had President Giuliani, President Bloomberg, or President de Blasio. Actually, in all three cases, Jill, they all did very poorly in the presidential race. But you know who wants to be president? Andrew Cuomo. You know why? His dad never became president. There's a whole competition with Andrew Cuomo where, he wanted to be governor for as long as his father did. His father never became president, ran in the 90s. Bill Clinton would eventually become president that cycle. So Andrew Cuomo, very interested. And so people kind of view the mayoral, return to being mayor sort of as a cleansing opportunity to sort of reset things after governor so you can then run for president. But he's got his work cut out for him if he wants to be mayor, it appears.
All right, to our next story here from NBC News, and just a warning, if you are driving with kids, you might want to turn it down for a few minutes anyway, as it might not be appropriate. Rapper Fat Joe is accused of forcing one of his former performers that was in his group to engage in thousands of sex acts with women in a $20 million federal lawsuit that also alleges that this person was underpaid, denied songwriting credits, and threatened. The lawsuit says that Terrence Dixon, known as TA, was the rapper's hype man or onstage entertainer and contributed as his lyricist, background vocalist, bodyguard, and creative collaborator from about 2005 to 2022. The lawsuit alleges that Fat Joe, whose real name is Joseph Antonio Cartagena, routinely took women back to his hotel rooms and forced Dixon to engage in sexual acts with them, sometimes in front of members of the rapper's inner circle. The lawsuit accuses Cartagena of remaining in the room to watch, record, and, quote, provide explicit direction and commands. The lawsuit also alleges that Dixon witnessed Cartagena engage in sexual relations with 15 and 16-year-old girls. Dixon estimates that over 16 years, he was forced to take part in more than 4,000 sexual acts to maintain his standing within Fat Joe's business. Lawyers for Fat Joe say that the lawsuit is retaliation for a lawsuit that the rapper filed in April accusing his former hype man of extortion, slander, and defamation. They say the allegations against the rapper are, quote, complete fabrications.
So for those of you who forgot about Fat Joe, remember, Lean Back, Lean Back, Lean Back. That was one of his hits about 20 years ago. Also, one of his songs was What's Love? It should be about us. It should be about us. So if you remember those hits, those were Fat Joe hits from the early 2000s, the early aughts there. But what's interesting here is these allegations very reminiscent of the allegations against Diddy, whose trial is ongoing and appears to be wrapping up here. The prosecution, now this is a separate case, so those are the Fat Joe allegations. As far as the Diddy trial, it's been going on for a number of weeks here. The prosecution is expected to wrap up its case today, final arguments this week. And ultimately, you would ask, well, what about the defense? The prosecution's gone. What about the defense? Well, one of the key questions we've been asking about the defense is, are they going to put Diddy on the stand? And it appears he was preparing to take the stand as his own defense here, but he has had a change of heart and will not be testifying. So, ultimately here, it's not clear how this case is going to go. The defense is going to go very quickly here. And then again, we expect final arguments this week. Now, legal analysts who've been watching this have said that Diddy testifying could backfire on him. So maybe it's not about his change of heart, but the fact that his lawyers don't think he'd be a very good representative in order to get him found not guilty in his case. It could also expose him to very damaging cross-examination from the prosecution. So they decided not to put him on the stand here. Now, the allegations when it comes to Diddy, just a recap here, is that he used wealth, threats, violence to coerce women, including ex-girlfriends, into drug-fueled freak-off sex parties The evidence so far in the last few weeks presented in court has been pretty wild. Graphic video footage allegedly showing non-consensual sex acts, blackmailing of victims, text messages from Diddy himself and his staff to coordinate some of these things, drug deliveries, spreadsheets tracking women's names and their appearances at parties. Just a bunch of horrific details have come out in this trial so far. Some emotional testimony from his ex-girlfriend, Cassie, who we've been familiar with from the video that was released and the allegations there. We will see what comes of the defense here and then final arguments. But despite some of this compelling testimony and some of the stuff I laid out here, federal prosecutors still face an uphill climb here in proving their case. Apparently, a key challenge here for the prosecution has been establishing the element of coercion, a critical component of the accusation of sex trafficking. So while he engaged in a lot of these acts, they have to prove that Diddy himself was engaged in coercion here. And ultimately, did they make that case is going to be a key question here when it comes to the jury. The defense has been arguing here that Combs' ex-girlfriends were willing participants in all this stuff that he was advocating for. And they did present from their side text messages from Cassie and others being very enthusiastic about these freak-off parties and some of the things that Combs was pushing for. And so that's what you're hearing there. But you have heard from psychologists and others who have tried to undermine Diddy's argument that this was not consensual. This is what they call a trauma bond, that the perpetrators can make it difficult for the victims in an abusive relationship. So a lot of complexity here. But now you have these new Fat Joe allegations as we're watching sort of the conclusion here of the Diddy trial.
From the New York Post, Tony and Emmy Award-winning actress and Oklahoma native Kristin Chenoweth performed the Star-Spangled Banner Sunday night before Game 7 of the NBA Finals between the Oklahoma City Thunder and the Indiana Pacers. And, well, let's just take a listen. For the land of the free.
That was quite a note, Jill, and she held it. You got the full Chenoweth there.
I hate to say it kind of hurts your ears, but that one note, I think, was the only part that's getting a lot of play. The rest of it was kind of like the opera style that she's known for, Glenda, from Wicked. Inside the arena, people seem to love it. That flourished there at the end. But on social media, that's where people were not so kind. For example, you had someone saying that bleep genuinely ruined the anthem, another calling it the worst national anthem that they ever heard. Everyone's a critic, Moshe.
Yes, on social media. I mean, listen, that was next level. I mean, there are very few people on earth that could probably hit that note and hold it in that way. Does that mean you should do that in the NBA arena? Listen, clearly everyone has various opinions about it. It's impressive. I mean, Kristin Chenoweth has one of the most remarkable voices in the world. But it was definitely her sort of unique take on the national anthem there. And again, the people in the arena seem to love it. The people on social media, well, they're doing the social media thing, which is, that sucked. That was terrible. She ruined the national anthem. How could you, Chenoweth? There were also people on social media, by the way, who loved it. One person wrote, perfect in every way. Ranks in the top 5 ever renditions of the beautiful Star-Spangled Banner. Brought tears to my eyes. Thank you, Kristin Chenoweth. Now, by the way, Chenoweth, reacting to the reaction, sharing a quote, the price of authenticity is being disliked. So clearly she has heard some of the critics and she has said, well, I was being authentic to myself. And so there you have it. Now, there is a history here of Star-Spangled Banner national anthem renditions at major sporting events, some getting praise. The ones, though, that we seem to remember are the ones that are not so praised in history. We mentioned Fergie at the top of the podcast. She did what we can call a jazzy version of the Star-Spangled Banner back at the All-Star Game, NBA All-Star Game in 2018. And then you also, of course, had Roseanne Barr, Roseanne Arnold. I think she did a Padres game, a baseball game in the 90s. It was just like her yelling. That was, first of all, let's just say the Roseanne edition, terrible all around. There's no praise for the Roseanne edition. And then you have like the amazing ones, the Whitney Houston Super Bowl Anthem, Jill, from 91, probably known as like one of the greatest performances across the board of an anthem at a major sporting event. So there you have it. By the way, we should mention, we didn't get into the podcast yesterday, but the Oklahoma City Thunder won Game 7 to become the champions, NBA champions this season over the Indiana Pacers. I know some people in Indiana are very disappointed. I know some Thunder fans who are very happy. By the way, for those of you who haven't followed the NBA in recent years, the Oklahoma City Thunder were formerly the Seattle Supersonics. So technically, as a franchise, this is their second ever championship because they won one in Seattle in the 70s, but this is their first championship in Oklahoma City. All right, finally, we end here with On This Day in History. We begin on this day in 1947. The term flying saucer was coined on this day by an American businessman. Kenneth Arnold was his name. He saw a number of objects up near Mount Rainier in Washington state that were flying like saucers. It was considered the first sort of modern sighting of a UFO, and that gave rise to the term flying saucers.
I like my flying saucers, chocolate, maybe vanilla, preferably ice cream format. And Moshe, based on your non-reaction, I'm guessing you don't know what a flying saucer is in terms of ice cream.
I was like, it sounds like it's a great dessert, but I've never had one, Jill. Where can I get a flying saucer in dessert form?
I quickly Googled. I think it's a Carvel thing, and Carvel is an ice cream chain that might just be a Long Island chain.
There you go. So go get yourself a chocolatey flying saucer out there on Long Island. A couple of other items on this day in history. On this day in 2018, women in Saudi Arabia were given the right to drive for the first time. That just happened about 7 years ago there. That was the last remaining ban on women driving in the world. On this day in 2022, the Dobbs decision came down from the Supreme Court. That was the decision that would overturn Roe v. Wade, allow states to ban abortion again, and that's been happening across the country. And pop culture moment. On this day in 2003, the Black Eyed Peas gave us Ella Funk. You remember the Ella Funk album? If you don't remember the album, Jill, you might remember some of the songs. Shut Up, Just Shut Up, Shut Up. And then Where Is the Love? And then Let's Get It Started in Here.
Do I remember the album? I actually didn't remember the name of the album, but I very much remember all of those songs.
Yeah, that was the era we were transitioning from Napster to iTunes.
Yes.
We probably each paid 99 cents a piece for each of those songs. By the way, Let's Get It Started. That was eventually the name of the song. The first version of the song was Let's Get a term that is inappropriate now that sounds like started. And so then they eventually changed the name of that song.
Good call, Black Eyed Peas. All right. Thank you all for listening to another news-packed Mo News podcast. If you like what you hear, please share this with your friends. It helps us grow. Follow us, subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and review us in the App Store. The reviews truly do help us. Thank you.
Yeah. To quote the Black Eyed Peas, if you don't leave us a positive review, I might ask you, where is the love? Where is the love? I'm doing a terrible impression.
I didn't know. Let's get it started. I didn't know where you were gonna go.
Right, and then I would say to you, to quote the Black Eyed Peas again, let's get it started in here. Let's get those reviews started in here. And if you don't leave us a review, I might just tell you to shut up, just shut up, shut up.
Moshe, very nicely done. I like it. All right, everyone. He could go on, but I think we gotta go
on. I'm no Will I Am, though. All right, I'll see you guys.
Thanks for listening to the Mo News podcast. Have a fantastic day. I hope you enjoyed.